Dick by Tony Gilbert. Walter's Tavern is quiet for a Saturday night. In fact, it has as much life as a cemetery. There are three guys over in the corner in the booth nearest the bar, staring at nothing, each cradling a cloudy drink in a chipped glass. One of the guys I think I recognize, though I can't be sure. Then there's the dog curled up by the bar, which is empty except for a couple of frayed beer towels and some rancid peanuts. How do I know they're rancid? They're the reason our jolly bartender, Clyde, had his teeth knocked out yesterday evening by a couple of cats who hadn't liked the taste. He isn't much of a conversationalist. He can barely manage a grunt. I look into the dark amber of my drink, watch it through the ice cubes that I hadn't asked for, but had been given anyway. I like the way the light shines through it, moving shapes across the scratched and dirty table. I like the way it looks. It helps me think, to evaluate whatever case I'm working on. I never take a sip, though. Not a drop of hard liquor has passed my lips since 1939. Cross my heart, man. Hope to die. Gently, I push the tumbler across the table where it catches on a deep gouge and almost tips over. I watch it for a second, the liquid caressing the surface of the glass, before I turn and stand to face my coat, which hangs on a hook by the door underneath a sign marked Hats. My own hat is still on my head, pitched slightly forward, hiding my eyes. I take a step forward and the door opens. A soft wind rocking the unshaded bulb, hanging between me and the exit. I look up at the silhouette snaking towards me, the perfect hourglass figure, all hips and bust, hair bouncing off her shoulders in time with the click-click of high heels on a tiled floor. I touch the tip of my hat as she passes me, but any reaction is lost in the shadows. I let out a breath that I didn't realize I'd been holding, and walk towards the door, reaching for my pressed beige overcoat. My hand hovers in the stale air when I hear the woman's voice. "Any messages?" A husky voice, a southern twang that I'd know anywhere. I turn slightly to the left and glance over my shoulder. Clyde was in mid-head shake. No messages. I consider turning and calling her name, but think better of it. I unhook my coat and swing it over my shoulder. "Not even gonna say hello?" That voice again. That sweet, dangerous voice. I turn resigned to my fate. Emerald green eyes, framed with fiery red hair. "Red winters," I say. "Dick Harris," she says. She smiles as she says it. I fell in love with that smile a long, long time ago. We look at each other for a long second until Clyde places a glass onto the bar beside Red. Me and her look towards it at the same time. Red reaches over and runs one fingernail up the slender stem before reaching the bowl. I watch as her fingers caress the curve, drawing lines through the watermark. I feel a droplet of sweat run down the side of my face, and she reaches up to it, her fingertip, so cold yet so soft that I barely feel it. She pulls back, touching her finger to her mouth, leaving a shine on her bottom lip. I lick my own lip instinctively. "You still off the hard stuff?" I blink and shake my head slightly, returning to the room. "Sorry," I say. "Liquor." She lifts her glass up to her lips. "Still not drinking?" "Cross my heart and hope to die," I say, drawing an X across my chest. "Do you want a coffee?" "Don't think they do coffee here." I glance at Clyde. His swollen, broken lips form a silent O as he shakes his head. "I've got coffee upstairs, handsome." "I've got coffee upstairs, handsome." "You live here?" I'm not surprised, not really. Red, living in a dirty bar in downtown New York, was something I should have expected. What does surprise me, though, is that why, in all the bars and all the towns in all the world, did I have to walk into hers? She places her glass down on the bar and turns. I'm powerless to stop myself, and I feel my feet move. I see Clyde, a towel in one hand, a glass tumbler in the other, a strange little smile on his face. I ignore him, and my mind starts to catch up with my feet. I haven't seen Red in nearly 3 years, and I haven't thought about her for a long time. We were tight for a while, too tight for her, 'cause she split one night, took my money and my gun, and pulled the old disappearing act. I looked for her, of course, used a few good contacts that owed me favors. I stopped when I realized it had all been for the best. After all, I'm a private dick, she's a hooker. Sounds more like a Hollywood movie than real life. I can picture it now. Dick, the Private Dick, starring Dick Harris and Nancy Red Winters. Sounds like a kick. I walk through the narrow doorway and glance up at Red, her pale calves smooth beneath a deep green dress, the cotton tight around firm thighs. Her buttocks move beneath the material as if they were trying to escape from their confines, and shit to look as if they were having fun trying. I lose sight of her for a moment as she turns right at the top of the stairs. When I reach the carpeted corridor, she's waiting for me outside the first door. She pulls at a silver chain around her neck, and everything inside me tells me to turn on my heels and get out before I get too far in. A small silver key struggles out from between the swell of her breasts, and my thoughts of the cool air outside disappear. I fleetingly wonder how she manages to keep those girls from popping out as she unlocks the door, takes my hand, and leads me inside. Red slips from beside me and stands, her body lithe as a serpent and pale as a ghost. She is mesmerizing, and my eyes focus on a bead of sweat just south of her right buttock. I watch it travel down her legs, kissing her skin until it stops behind her knee. She walks away and into the dark bathroom, closing the door behind her, and I hear the shower turn on. I sigh, but I'm not sure whether it is one of happiness or of angst. I mean, she is the perfect woman, and she knows how to please her man, but I've been her man before, and I know the other side of that coin. I silently curse myself as I realize that I let her seduce me again, and so easily. Have I got no mind of my own? But is it really my fault? Maybe I've never lost that flame for her. After all, it wasn't me who had extinguished the fire. It was her. It was her who had walked away. It was her who had run. She hadn't even left a note. No sign that she wasn't happy. Why the hell was I up here? The water stops and the door opens with a cloud of bitter-smelling steam. Red stands in the doorway, embraced by a black velvet gown. Her striking eyes sparkle through strands of her wet hair, now a dark auburn. I stand, facing away from her, and pull my underwear and pants on. They don't feel good over my damp, sticky body, and I feel dirtier than a whore on Diamond Street, which is pretty apt. I pull up my belt as I scan the floor for my shirt, but look up as a hand rests on my shoulder. What have you been up to then, Dick? I turn to her. She's kneeling on the bed, the skirt of her gown riding up seductively high, the collar slipping dangerously low. I could see in her eyes that she knew she'd done wrong. Maybe this was some sort of an apology. Where you been, Red? I say, ignoring her question, as I pull a slightly crumpled packet of Marlboro from my pocket. She doesn't answer, just takes the cigarette I've just put in my mouth and places it between her own curved lips. I take another from the pack and then offer her a match before lighting my own. I watch her draw smoke in before letting her hand drop, closing her eyes and letting it out again. She doesn't release her breath, just lets the gray mist spiral up from her lips. I used to like the way she smoked, but now she was just another broad with a dirty habit. We're both silent for a while. She keeps looking at me, and I keep avoiding her gaze. She walks back into the bathroom, and I find my shirt, still wishing for that coffee. Business hasn't picked up by the time I walk past the smiling Clyde. It looks like the 3 deadbeats in the corner have been reduced to 2. The one I recognized has disappeared. The dog hasn't moved an inch. I'm not sure it's even breathing. I take a last look and walk toward the exit. As I reach for the door, it opens and a large man blocks my way. I sigh, look up at him, and smile. It was 1942, and I was working a job on Cannery Row at a little biological testing site called the PBT. A woman's body had been found out the back by the specimen tanks. The poor broad's head was missing, but had been located, pickled in a glass jar and hanging suspended in the porch of the home she shared with her husband and 4-year-old daughter. The first thing her husband had seen as he walked out that morning was the blue face of his wife, mouth open in a silent scream. I was still a cop back then, an investigator with delusions of grandeur. I was young, I was naive, and Richie Hartman was my only suspect. Hartman was a small-time gangster, petty stuff, you know. Crimes you wouldn't write home about. Minor drug dealing, small-time shoplifting, that kind of thing. It was common knowledge that he was a womanizer, an up-and-coming athlete and a good-looking man. The dead woman, a girl called Betty Richards, had been seen with Hartman a few times in the weeks before her death. So naturally, maybe she'd tried to end the relationship. Maybe he'd seen her with someone else. Maybe he got drunk and made a mistake. Maybe he'd finally snapped. There were a lot of questions, a lot of maybes, but that was all I needed. I knew it was him, and I gave him hell. Hartman had a rock-tight alibi, but what does that matter to a 20-something cop with his eyes set on a detective badge? I trailed him day and night, pestered him constantly, pestered him so much that he'd drawn a gun on me. I shot first. Only he hadn't drawn a gun. He didn't have a gun. He had a photo of the man who had killed Betty Richards. I lost my badge, but he has never lost his limp. He kind of sneers at me, not a look that I am unfamiliar with in my line of work. Before offering me his hand, I take it and give it one solid shake. All business. Richie Hartman, I say. Richie Hartman, I say. I see they've been feeding you well down in old Monterey. I gesture with my chin down to the gut protruding above his belt. Remember, Dick, he says in his 20-a-day voice, you're not a cop now, and I always keep my blade handy. I look up at him in time to see his scowl turn into a smile, and he grabs my shoulders, pulling me into a hug. There aren't many guys who I'd let hug me, but damn, he's strong. Let me buy you a drink, old friend, he says, releasing me from the bear hug. I've been looking for you everywhere. You know what I say? Let's go somewhere else. I need a cup of coffee. I know that behind me, Clyde is rolling his eyes. We settle in a well-lit cafe on Broome Street. A red and white sign hanging outside it advertises it as bongos. I order a coffee from a pretty middle-aged waitress in a pristine white apron. Richie goes for steak and fries. As we wait for our order, I just look at him. There's definitely something on his mind. Not sure I've ever seen him looking so detached. A different waitress brings our order over and Richie plows in. I lift the coffee to my lips, but it's far too hot. So I push it to the side of the table and lean back, watching the food on Richie's plate swiftly disappear. You said you've been looking for me, I say. He looks up from the half-masticated cow. I've got a job for you. I consider this for a moment. Richie has never offered me work before. Why would he? He has his own men with a lot less inhibitions than me. He tosses his cutlery down by the side of his smeared plate. My kid came home the other day. Little Robert, how is he? I ask. He's good. He came home. How old is he now? I ask. 7. He waits a moment, looking at me, before continuing. He came home the other day and told me something. He lowers his voice close to a whisper. He said that someone had, Hit him? No. Mugged him? No. Run over his dog? For fuck's sake, no, he says, shocking me. I've heard him swear before, but never with ladies present. Someone touched him, you know. Sick More coffee, sweetheart? The first waitress appears again. I look up at Richie, who is draining the last of my coffee. He shakes his head and waves her off. I need you to talk to the guy who done it, he says. There's only one reason I can think of that Richie hasn't already nailed this guy to the door. I nod to him. What's his name? He looks at me with an expression that's a cross between He looks at me with an expression that's a cross between a pained frown and an angry grimace, and says the name I'm expecting. Father Edgar Songs, he says. His brother-in-law. Before I leave, Richie slides a sheet of paper across the table. It says, Meet contact 10 a.m. Wear disguise. There's an address at the bottom. It's not easy to find a specialist costume shop before 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning, even in the Big Apple. Unless, that is, you know where to look. My outfit is slightly snugger fitting in places where I would prefer it not to be snug. But to an untrained eye, it's passable. I smooth the creases out of the thin fabric as I walk towards the corner of Nassau Avenue and Henry Street, opposite the church. I kind of like the respect I get dressed as a nun, and smile at the people who bow their heads as I pass them. Richie told me where I would meet my contact, and I am quite pleased to see that the man in front of me must have studied at the same school of undercover investigation techniques as me. He's dressed as a priest. A stiff three-peaked beretta rests almost jauntily on the top of his head, and he's wearing an obviously fake, bushy black beard. His collar is a dazzling white, and his cloak so dark that it makes my tunic look almost gray in comparison. I nod a small greeting. Father, I say, attempting to heighten the pitch of my voice for the benefit of the sparse human traffic. He nods in return, but eyes me a bit warily. Nice acting. You never know who's trying to set you up. Is he in there? I gesture at the large church, its windows dark. He pauses and looked at me with dark, narrowing eyes. I'm sorry, sister. I think for a moment, trying to remember if Richie had given me a code word. When I look up, the priest is taking a few steps away. Hey, I forget about trying to disguise my voice, and a few stragglers turn their heads. Richie didn't give me a code word. He looks at me, eyes widening over his nylon face fur. Richie? There's a slight tremor in the word. Yeah, I say, Richie Hartman. With that, he turns and runs. It takes me more than a few ticks to realize my mistake, and I hitch up my skirts, revealing pulled-up black socks and hairy legs. Before I even get close to the fleeing man, a 1954 Lincoln Capri, sky blue, screeches up to the curb, and the priest runs headlong into it. A woman jumps out as the front wheel scrapes the edge of the sidewalk. She grabs him, knocking that damn Beretta off, and chucks him without ceremony into the rear of the car. It's only then that I realize I've stopped running, and am standing in the middle of the road, skirts still hitched up above my knees, staring at the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Get in, Dick, she says, breaking my reverie. She jumps back into the driver's seat and guns the engine, further snapping me out of whatever daydream I'm stuck in. Whoever the hell this beautiful broad is, she means business. I run toward the front of the car, jump, and begin sliding across the bonnet. I run towards the front of the car and begin sliding across the bonnet, Gary Cooper style, a smug look on my face. My feet touch the floor on the other side, just as my trailing habit snags on the hood ornament, pulling me into a kind of tuck and roll. My feet kick out, my habit rips, and I headbutt the bonnet before sliding to the floor. The woman doesn't do a great job of concealing the glee she has written all over her face, as I manage to pull myself into the front passenger seat of the Lincoln. She looks at me, smiles, and hands me a tissue that looks as if it may have been used on at least 2 previous occasions. "You're bleeding," she says to me as she pulls out in front of a cursing cyclist. I look at her side on. She's blonde, real blonde, not out of a bottle, or so I can tell with my limited experience with hair colorants. And her eyes are blue, sparkling like sapphires. She has a short, straight nose that tilts up a touch at the end of her. She has a short, straight nose that tilts up a touch at the end, and her lips are thin and perfect. I inadvertently compare her to the woman I spent the previous afternoon with, and inwardly sigh, not for the first time. I dab at the graze on my head, and it comes away with a light spattering of deep red. "So who the hell are you?" I glance at the gun-shaped bulge beneath her belt before remembering my contact sitting silent in the back seat. I turn to him. He's staring out the window, a look of fear in his face. "Richie didn't mention me," she asks. I must have looked confused. "You've already met the father, I see." Then the light dawns and I look back again. "You mean that beard's real?" Father Edgar Songs opens his mouth to reply, but the woman beats him to it. "You fucking open your mouth, I'll cut your tongue out," she says. I like this woman. She speaks her mind. She doesn't hold back. "Nice costume, by the way," she says with a smile that only makes me feel a little bit stupid. I realize I don't recognize the street we're on, which is strange, because I know this city like the back of my hand. She pulls down a long gravel drive and stops just short of a set of rusty gates at the entrance to a long, disused warehouse. There's a sign nailed up above the shutter doors directly behind the gates, but there are too many letters missing for me to recognize the name. The fencing to either side of us is cracked and broken, and someone has scrawled something unreadable across one of the panels in black paint. She opens the door and steps out, so I follow her lead and look at her across the Lincoln's roof. The sun is strong, bouncing off the roof, and I find myself squinting, so I can't quite see her. "So, who are you?" "Richie thought we might get along," the woman smiles. "And what do you think?" You look okay, but your dress sense leaves a lot to be desired." I can't tell if she's serious or not. "I normally have a bit more notice when I'm meeting with a woman," I say. Her blurry shape nods, and she moves around to the front of the car. As she comes into view and I blink away the black spots floating in front of my eyes, she raises her hand. "I'm Lois Love." I take her hand. It's small and cold. "Dick Harris," I say, "but I guess you already knew that." "Of course," she says. "Dick Harris, recovering alcoholic, failed police officer turned expert private investigator. Never carries a loaded gun." "Richie tell you that?" I ask, and she nods. I realize I'm still holding her hand, and I relax my fingers and drop mine to the side. I my side. I look at her for a moment, examine her face. There is a small scar just above her right eye, and I realize absently that I want to kiss the place where someone had hurt her many years previous. She breaks the silence. "You don't have any questions for me?" "Ah, Miss Love, failed marriage, unhealthy obsession with candle wax, and a dark past in tic-tac-toe." I enjoy the look of incredulity on her beautiful face. "How did you—" "Miss Love," I say, "remember, I am a private investigator." She chuckles at that as she walks past me, opens the rear door, and drags Father Edgar Songs out onto the stony ground.